It was supposed to be another great family dinner at my apartment, as usual. Then my daughter handed me a paper to sign, saying it was for the health insurance. I signed it without reading. I always trusted my daughter. Later that same night, she started laughing and shouted in my face, "How stupid you are! Now this apartment is all mine. I want you out of here tomorrow." The next day, her reaction was priceless when she found out that I owned the whole building. That lesson my daughter will never forget. My name is Evelyn. I'm 68 years old, and until last week I believed the greatest treasure I had ever built wasn't the real estate I bought with the sweat of my brow, but the family I raised within it. Life taught me to be strong. I was widowed very young and had to learn to fend for myself, with a little girl in my arms and an uncertain future ahead. By day, I dusted other people's furniture. By night, I wiped the exhaustion from my eyes to study accounting. Every brick of my small portfolio was laid with sacrifice and an unwavering faith that I was building a fortress to protect my Lucy, my only daughter. However, no fortress is impenetrable, especially when the threat comes from within. My greatest mistake, my deepest weakness, was always believing that love is measured by unconditional surrender, even when my gut screamed that I was surrendering myself to an abyss. It all started on a rainy Wednesday, the kind where the Chicago sky seems to weep without solace. Lucy called me, her voice sweeter than usual, inviting me to a special dinner at her apartment. I found it strange. Ever since she started dating Richard almost 2 years ago, our get-togethers had become rare and perfunctory. He was a young man with an easy smile and calculating eyes who seemed more interested in the price per square foot in my neighborhood than in the stories of my life. But, like a mother who yearns for her daughter's closeness, I ignored the signs and went. Her apartment was different. Scented candles flickered on the table, soft, low music played in the background, and a vase of white lilies, my favorite flowers, adorned the center. It was a staged scene, a play where I was the guest of honor, unaware that the script already called for my ruin. We talked about trivial things during dinner. She complimented my dress, asked about my health, recalled happy moments from her childhood. Every word was a caress, every smile another nail in the coffin she was preparing for me. Then, after dessert, she pushed a stack of papers across the linen tablecloth. "Mom, I need you to sign these documents," she said, with a rehearsed seriousness. "It's just some red tape with our health insurance plan, an update for the dependents. It has to be today, or we'll miss the deadline." I looked at the papers. The print was tiny, the legal terms like a foreign language. Trust, that blindfold we wear for love, stopped me from reading carefully. My daughter needed me. What mother would deny a signature? I took the pen she offered, the metal cold in my fingers, and signed where she pointed on every page without question. The moment the ink from the last signature dried, the music seemed to stop. The warmth of the candles turned icy. Lucy's smile dissolved, replaced by a mask of contempt I had never seen before. She gathered the papers slowly, with predatory care. "You really are a fool, Mother," she said, and her laughter was the cruelest sound I had ever heard. The words hit me like stones, breaking something deep inside me. "You just signed over the title to your apartment. It's mine now. I want you out of here by tomorrow. Richard and I are moving in." The world spun. The air left my lungs. I looked at my daughter's face, the girl I nursed and taught to walk, and I didn't recognize her. She was a stranger, a predator who had just devoured her own mother. I remained silent, the shock paralyzing me. My expression stayed calm, a facade of serenity hiding the demolition occurring in my soul. She expected tears, pleas, despair. But that night, as the rain beat against the window, something older and stronger than my pain began to awaken within me. A part of myself I had kept dormant for years. The woman who built everything from nothing had not completely disappeared. And as Lucy smiled, victorious, I was already starting to draw up a plan. I left Lucy's apartment as if floating through a nightmare. The cold, fine rain wet my face, but I barely felt it. The city lights, usually so vibrant, seemed like blurry smudges of paint running down a dark canvas. Every step on the way back home, to my now former home, was heavy, as if I were walking on the bottom of an ocean of sorrow. The sound of my shoes on the wet pavement was the only real thing. Inside my head, Lucy's laugh echoed, cruel and sharp, undoing every happy memory we once shared. How could I have been so blind? A mother's love, I reflected, is a thick fog that prevents us from seeing the truth, even when it's right in front of us. I remembered when she was little and secretly swapped her broken toy for her cousin's, then cried crocodile tears, claiming hers had been stolen. I believed her, defended her, bought another toy for my niece. Back then, it seemed like a childish prank. Today, I saw the seed of the woman she had become. When I reached my building, the lights in the lobby seemed welcoming, a warm lie. Joe, the doorman who had worked here since I moved in, was at his post. He saw me enter, soaked and with a lost look in my eyes, and his usually smiling face tightened with concern. "Mrs. Evelyn, are you all right? Should I call you a cab? You look like you've seen a ghost." His genuine kindness was like a needle piercing the bubble of numbness I was in. I just shook my head, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I'm fine, Joe. Just a long day." He didn't seem convinced. His eyes followed me with silent compassion as I walked toward the elevator. And I knew he sensed that something terrible had happened. He was part of my life, my routine, a silent witness to my world that was now crumbling. Inside my apartment, the silence was deafening. Every object seemed to accuse me. The picture frame on the shelf, with a photo of me and Lucy smiling in a park, was now an affront. The armchair where I used to rock her to sleep, the rug where she took her first steps. They were relics of a love I had just discovered was one-sided. I sat on the sofa, the familiar velvet fabric under my fingers, and finally allowed the tears to come. They were not of despair, but of a deep sorrow, the grief for a daughter who, to me, had died that night. I wept for the naive mother I had been, for the trust I had given, and for the loneliness that awaited me. But amidst the weeping, the sadness began to transform. An ember of anger, small and hot, started to burn in my chest. The woman who faced the world to raise her daughter could not simply surrender. The pain gave way to a cold, sharp clarity. Lucy wasn't just being cruel, she was being an amateur. And Richard, the gold-digging boyfriend, had grossly underestimated whom he was dealing with. They thought they had stolen the home of a frail old woman. They had no idea they had just awakened the businesswoman who built an empire. I stood up, wiped my face, and walked to my old office. I opened the bottom drawer of a heavy metal file cabinet, a piece of furniture that held decades of documents. At the very back, under old contracts and yellowed certificates, was a blue cardstock folder covered in a thin layer of dust. I hadn't opened it in years. I pulled it out and placed it on the desk. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from an adrenaline I hadn't felt in a long time. Inside were not just old papers, but the key to the first move in my game. The blue folder contained the proof of my prudence, or perhaps my pessimism. There, stapled in chronological order, were the documents for a loan I had taken out 2 months prior. A substantial loan, with interest rates that would make a banker smile, and for collateral I had put up the very apartment where I lived, the same one Lucy now believed was her grand prize. At the time, I did it driven by a restlessness, a dark premonition that grew in my chest whenever I saw Richard looking at my things. He didn't look with admiration, but with the greed of a surveyor measuring a plot of land to be divided. I told myself it was a test. If Lucy and he were truly honest, that debt would just be a number on a piece of paper that I would quietly pay off. But if my suspicions were correct, the trap was set. I just never imagined the prey would fall into it so eagerly, dragging my heart along with it. I closed the folder with a sharp snap in the silence of the office. The pain of betrayal was still there, but now it had a companion, the cold determination of someone going into battle. The next morning, the phone rang. It was Lucy. Her voice no longer held the sweetness of the previous night. It was metallic, impatient. "Well, Mother, have you packed your things? I don't want to have to call the police to remove you from my house." The word "my" was spoken with cruel emphasis. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice calm, almost submissive. "Good morning to you too, my dear. Yes, I'm just finishing packing a few things into a suitcase. Don't worry, I won't cause any trouble." There was a pause on the other end of the line, as if she was surprised by my resignation. "Good. Leave the key with the doorman," she said, before hanging up in my face. I began to pack the small travel bag. I didn't take jewelry or valuables. I packed my wedding album, the first pair of wool booties I knitted for Lucy, and a small wooden rosary that belonged to my mother. They were things money couldn't buy and that Richard would never covet. Each item was a memory, a piece of the life I thought I had built on the rock of family love, but which turned out to be built on the sand of greed. When I left the apartment, closing the door behind me for the last time, I felt a tightness in my chest. It was the end of a chapter. In the lobby, Joe was waiting for me with a look of pure anguish. He must have overheard Lucy's conversation with the front desk. He saw my small suitcase and his shoulders slumped. "Mrs. Evelyn," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "If you need anything, a place to stay for a few days. My sister has a spare room." The generosity of this man, almost a stranger, contrasted so brutally with the cruelty of my own daughter that I needed all my strength not to break down right there. I placed my hand on his, on the cold marble counter. "I thank you from the bottom of my heart, Joe. You're a good man, but I'll be fine. I already have a place to go." He looked at me, confused, but nodded. I handed him the key to my former home. "Bus for the new owner," I said without emotion. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the curtain in the window of Lucy's apartment move. She and Richard were watching my exile, surely savoring their victory. I let them watch my performance. I walked slowly toward the building's exit, head down, shoulders slumped, the perfect picture of defeat. But instead of going through the glass door to the street, I made a soft, unexpected turn, walking toward the service area, where the superintendent's small office was located. Manny, the super, a loyal man who had worked for me for over 20 years, was fixing a faucet. He looked up when he saw me, wiping his dirty hands on a rag. "Mrs. Evelyn, is something wrong?" My body straightened. The frail, defeated woman vanished. I looked at him with the firmness of a general giving an order. "Manny, the renovations on 1201 are finished, aren't they? The penthouse." He blinked, surprised by the change in my tone. "Yes, ma'am. We finished last week. Everything is in order, just as you asked." "Excellent," I said, with a half smile. "Take this bag up there, please, and arrange for a full cleaning. Starting today, I'll be living upstairs." Manny looked at me for a moment, his brain processing the information. His eyes widened slightly as understanding dawned. A discreet but knowing smile appeared at the corner of his lips. "Right away. Mrs. Evelyn, don't you worry. I'll have the penthouse sparkling for you." He took my small bag with an almost reverential respect, as if carrying the insignia of a queen reclaiming her throne. As he walked away, I felt a wave of relief. I wasn't completely alone. There were good, loyal people around me, and in that moment, Manny's loyalty was worth more than any deed. I stood there for a few minutes, in the dim light of the service hallway, just breathing. It was my first counterattack, silent and invisible to the enemy, celebrating on a lower floor. They thought they had thrown me out onto the street, but in reality, they had only pushed me to the top of my own castle. I spent the rest of the morning with Manny, overseeing the final details in the penthouse. The apartment on the 12th floor was my secret refuge, a place I had prepared over the years, while Lucy lived on the 3rd floor. Believing that was my only valuable asset, I had quietly bought and renovated the top unit, the largest and most beautiful of them all. The walls were freshly painted in a soft cream color. The hardwood floors gleamed under the light pouring in from the immense glass windows, and the view was breathtaking. From there, I could see the city stretching to the horizon, a carpet of lights and concrete that reminded me of what I was capable of building. Manny, with his quiet efficiency, had already organized the cleaning and arranged to change a few light bulbs. "You really thought of everything, didn't you?" he commented, impressed, as he installed a curtain in the living room. I smiled. Life taught me to always have a plan B, Manny. In the afternoon, I decided it was time for the second act of my performance. I went back down to the lobby. This time, my posture was different. I was no longer slumped, but erect. I asked Joe to buzz Lucy's apartment, tell her that her mother is downstairs and needs to speak with her. I waited, observing the reflection of the woman in the glass of the front door, a grey-haired lady, elegant in a simple dress, but with a glint of steel in her eyes. Lucy and Richard came down together. She had an air of poorly disguised triumph. He had that fake smile that turned my stomach. They stopped at a safe distance, as if I were contagious. "What is it now, Mother? Did you forget something?" Lucy asked, crossing her arms. Richard just watched, the predator assessing his prey. "No, my dear, I didn't forget anything," I replied, my voice calm and steady. "I just came to make your new life official. You'll need the keys, won't you?" My eyes shifted to Manny, who was approaching us from the service elevator hallway, exactly as I had instructed. He carried a large key ring and a clipboard with papers. The jangling of the keys was the only sound in the silent lobby. Lucy's expression was one of pure confusion. Richard frowned, trying to make sense of the scene. "The superintendent will bring you the key. I've already spoken with him," I added, repeating the line I had mentally rehearsed. Manny stopped beside me and addressed me, completely ignoring Lucy and Richard. His performance was flawless. "Hello, Mrs. Evelyn. Your upstairs apartment is all ready for you to move in. Sorry about the delay on the renovation." The color drained from Lucy's face. Her wide eyes darted from Manny to me, her mouth slightly agape, her arrogance dissolving like sugar in the rain. "What do you mean, upstairs apartment?" she stammered, her voice a thin, trembling thread. Richard, beside her, lost his smile. His expression was one of shock, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his calculating eyes. He had been tricked. They had been tricked. I savored that moment, the sweet, silent revenge of the truth. I looked at my daughter, at the incomprehension stamped on her face, and answered with the calm of someone holding all the cards. "Oh, you didn't know, darling," I said, with a false innocence that barely concealed my triumph. "Your mother owns the entire building." The revelation hung in the lobby air, heavy and undeniable, like the humidity before a storm. The ensuing silence was broken only by the distant hum of an elevator motor. Lucy's jaw literally dropped. Her eyes, once sparkling with malice, were now dull, mirroring the image of a world that had just been turned upside down. Richard, meanwhile, took a step back, an almost imperceptible movement, like an animal reassessing the size of its prey and discovering it's actually a much larger predator. His mask of confidence cracked, revealing a layer of panic and restrained fury. He looked at me, no longer as a charming son-in-law, but as an adversary who had just suffered a devastating, unexpected blow. Joe, behind the counter, pretended to organize some papers, but I could see out of the corner of my eye that he was soaking in every second of the scene with poorly disguised satisfaction. "Owns the building," Lucy whispered, her voice hoarse, as if the words scraped her throat on their way out. That's impossible. You're a retiree. How?" She couldn't finish the sentence. The reality was too absurd for her to conceive. She, who had always seen me as a simple woman, a widow who got lucky with a single property, couldn't process the idea that I was the anonymous owner behind the entire condo association. For years, I had used a management company and a business name to handle the rents and purchases. I kept to the shadows, living modestly, not out of necessity, but out of strategy. It was my insurance against the world's greed, and sadly, against my own daughter's. "Looks can be deceiving, can't they?" I said, with a serenity that completely disarmed her. "While you were busy plotting how to take the roof from over your mother's head, I was busy making sure she always had one." I turned to Manny, who was waiting patiently. "Manny, please give the keys to 301 to the new owner, and this envelope as well." I handed him a manila folder I had brought with me. He took it and approached Lucy, who stared at him as if he were a ghost. "Miss Lucy, the keys to your apartment." He held out the key ring. Her hand trembled as she took them. "And this envelope is for you. From the building's management." Richard snatched the envelope from her hands and tore it open with eager fingers. His eyes scanned the document inside. I saw his jaw clench. It was the official notice of the mortgage debt tied to apartment 301, now officially transferred to the new owner's name, Lucy. The notice also included a warning of 3 overdue mortgage payments, something I had deliberately failed to pay in recent months. "What kind of joke is this?" he snarled. The charm evaporated, his voice laced with venom. "This apartment has a debt of almost $300,000. You gave us a Trojan horse." Finally, the beast showed its claws. I looked directly at him, without fear. "I didn't give you anything." Lucy took it. She signed the title transfer, remember, with all its clauses and obligations. The debt, unfortunately, is part of the package. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go up. The view from my new apartment is lovely. You should see it." I turned my back on them, a deliberate act to end the conversation, and walked toward the main elevator. Manny followed me, pressing the button for me. Before the metal doors closed, I cast one last look back. Lucy was paralyzed, the debt notice trembling in her hands, her face pale as wax. Richard was gripping her arm, his features twisted with rage. He was whispering something urgent and furious in her ear. The elevator doors closed, hiding the scene, but the sound of Richard's raised voice still echoed through the lobby, a dark promise that the battle was just beginning. The elevator doors closed like a theater curtain at the end of a dramatic act. Alone in the silent, rising metal box, I allowed myself to lean against the cold wall. My legs suddenly felt weak. The adrenaline that had sustained me during the confrontation began to dissipate, leaving behind a profound exhaustion and a persistent sadness. Seeing the look of shock and betrayal on Lucy's face should have brought me complete satisfaction, but the taste of victory was bitter. She was my daughter, after all. The little girl I taught to tie her shoes, whose forehead I kissed every night before she went to sleep. And the man beside her, poisoning her mind and heart, was living proof of my failure to protect her from herself and her bad choices. The elevator arrived at the 12th floor with a soft chime. The doors opened to an exclusive, well-lit hallway, my new home. But at that moment, it just felt like a higher, lonelier place from which to watch the ruin of my family. The days that followed were a silent torment. From my panoramic window, I had a privileged view of the building's courtyard. I saw Lucy and Richard coming and going. Their arguments were visible even from a distance. Their body language didn't lie. Sharp gestures, tense faces, car doors slamming shut. The dream of a luxury apartment had turned into a financial nightmare overnight. The first collection letters from the bank, which I knew were on their way, began to arrive. The mailman, a friendly man who had known me for years, delivered them with a curious glance. The name on the envelope was now Lucy's, but the address was the same one that had been mine for decades. The small building community, always alert to any new development, began to whisper. Mrs. Gable, my neighbor from the fourth floor, a woman as observant as an owl, called me under some flimsy pretext just to try and pry some information out of me. "Evelyn, dear, you moved into the penthouse. How wonderful. But what about Lucy? I heard she's living in your old apartment. Is everything all right with you two?" I deflected with the elegance life had taught me. "Oh, Sonia, it's just family arrangements. Lucy wanted a bit more independence," I'd say, knowing my vague words would only fuel the fires of curiosity even more. The hardest blow for Lucy, however, wasn't the debt or the neighbors' stares, but the loss of the status she so cherished. She'd always been proud to be Evelyn's daughter, the rich lady in the building. Now, she was the new resident of 301, an apartment everyone knew was drowning in problems. The situation became humiliatingly public when the first process server showed up. I was on my balcony watering my ferns when I saw the car with the Judiciary Seal Park in front of the building. The man in the suit and briefcase spoke to Joe at the front desk and, minutes later, went up. My heart tightened. I knew it was the beginning of the foreclosure process. It wasn't long before the intercom buzzed in Lucy's apartment. I could imagine her panic as she answered. The shame of having to receive a summons in front of everyone. Richard, however, seemed to have a plan. I found out through a casual conversation with Manny that he was trying to sell Lucy's car, a new model I had given her for her last birthday. He was in the parking garage, Mrs. Evelyn, showing the car to some shady-looking guy. Said he needed the money urgently, Manny told me, his voice low and concerned. It was obvious they were desperate. The money from the car sale would barely cover the accumulated interest on the debt, and then a new character entered the scene, further complicating the situation. One afternoon, I saw an elegant, severe-looking woman getting out of the elevator on Lucy's floor. It was Isabel, my niece, my late sister's daughter. Isabel was a lawyer, a competent professional, but as cold and calculating as an iceberg. Our relationship had always been distant, marked by a rivalry that dated back to childhood. She seemed to have inherited the envy her mother felt toward my success. Seeing her there, entering Lucy's apartment, could only mean one thing. My daughter was seeking legal reinforcements, and Isabel, with her poorly disguised contempt for me, was the perfect weapon Lucy could use to try to turn the tables. The war, which had been merely emotional and financial, was about to become a legal battle within my own family. Isabel's presence in the building was like the arrival of storm clouds on an already grey day. I watched her leave Lucy's apartment hours later, her leather briefcase under her arm, the satisfied expression of someone who has just found a promising case. Our eyes met for a brief moment as she waited for the elevator. She gave me a thin, almost imperceptible smile, laden with a silent challenge. We didn't exchange a word, but the message was clear. She was on Lucy's side, and she would spare no effort to fight me in court. That night, sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned in bed, thinking about how the situation had escalated so quickly. A family dispute would now turn into a lawsuit, with motions, hearings, and lawyers. The image of my family's dirty laundry being aired in a courtroom, our wounds open for strangers to judge, sent a shiver down my spine. Isabel was sharp. She would certainly try to void the property transfer, claiming that I, an elderly woman, was coerced or not in full command of my mental faculties. The irony was cruel. The victim of manipulation would now be painted as the manipulator. The following days confirmed my suspicions. An official notice arrived for me, a cold, impersonal document summoning me to a settlement hearing. The lawsuit filed by Lucy under Isabel's guidance requested the annulment of the title transfer contract, alleging lack of informed consent. They were arguing that my daughter signed the debt papers without being fully aware of what they entailed, that she was misled by me. It was a complete reversal of the truth, a shameless lie twisted into legal jargon. I felt my blood boil. Their audacity knew no bounds. At the same time, the financial noose around Lucy and Richard tightened. Manny kept me discreetly informed. They sold the television and the computer. Mrs. Evelyn. A man came to pick them up last night, he told me. I saw Richard leaving every morning, no longer in the luxury car, but on foot, with the hurried pace of someone late for an appointment they would rather not have. His arrogance had been replaced by a palpable anxiety. The turning point, the moment that changed the course of everything, happened on a Tuesday, a week after I moved to the penthouse. I was at the corner cafe buying fresh bread, when I overheard a conversation at the next table. It was two ladies, neighbors from a nearby building. They were talking about a mutual acquaintance, a widow named Amelia. Poor Amelia, one of them said. That handsome young man her daughter brought home just vanished, took her car, her jewelry, and left her with a huge debt at the bank. Apparently, he convinced her to mortgage her apartment to open a business that never existed. My blood ran cold. The description, the method, it was all terrifyingly familiar. The young man's name wasn't mentioned, but I didn't need to hear it. A terrible sense of recognition washed over me. Richard wasn't just an opportunist, he was a professional con artist. My daughter wasn't his accomplice, but likely his next victim. I returned home with my mind racing. The anger I felt toward Lucy began to be overshadowed by a growing fear for her. I had prepared her for a battle, but perhaps she was fighting the wrong war against the wrong person. The trap I had set to catch a greedy mouse might, in fact, be ensnaring my daughter along with a much more dangerous predator. What if he was manipulating her in a way far deeper than I imagined? What if she was so blinded by that passion that she couldn't see the abyss she was being pushed into? That afternoon, sitting in my luxurious living room, looking out at the city below, my victory seemed small and insignificant. I had protected my assets, but I might be about to lose my daughter in a much more definitive way. The lawsuit, the debts, all of it became secondary. The real danger was Richard, and he was downstairs in apartment 301 with unrestricted access to my daughter's life and possibly her finances. Suddenly, my strategy of waiting and watching no longer seemed so clever. It seemed like dangerous negligence. I needed to act. But how? How could I warn a daughter who saw me as her greatest enemy? The discovery of Richard's true character changed everything. The anger that had fueled me gave way to a cold dread. I was no longer in a dispute over property. I was in a race against time to save my daughter from a wolf in sheep's clothing. The legal battle, initiated by Isabel, which once seemed like an affront, now revealed itself as a smokescreen, a distraction that kept Lucy focused on me while the real enemy bled her dry. I spent a sleepless night connecting the dots. Richard's haste to get the transfer, his fury upon discovering the debt, his desperation to sell Lucy's assets. It wasn't just greed, it was a script, a well-rehearsed scam he had likely pulled before. The story of poor Amelia from the cafe echoed in my mind. How many other Amelias were out there? I decided I needed more information. I couldn't just go to Lucy and say, "Your boyfriend is a con man." She wouldn't believe me. She would think it was another one of my tricks to get the apartment back. I needed concrete, irrefutable proof. The next morning, I discreetly hired a private investigator, a man named Walter, recommended by an old real estate contact. He was a man of few words and watchful eyes, who listened to my story without showing surprise or judgment. I gave him a photo of Richard I found in an old album of Lucy's and asked him to investigate his life, his movements, his past. "I want to know everything, Walter. If he has other names, other families, other debts, everything." He nodded. "Leave it with me, Mrs. Evelyn. People like him always leave a trail." While Walter worked, the pressure on Lucy mounted. The first settlement hearing was scheduled. Isabel was confident, almost arrogant. In our brief pre-hearing conversation in the courthouse hallway, she treated me with cutting condescension. "Aunt Evelyn, It would be easier for everyone if you just admitted your mistake and gave back what is rightfully Lucy's. We could avoid an unnecessary ordeal. I faced her, my composure my best armor. The only ordeal I'm worried about, Isabel, is the one your client is suffering at the hands of her boyfriend. Perhaps you should use your talents to investigate the right person. She laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Don't try to change the subject. We're here to correct an injustice you committed. During the hearing, Lucy barely looked at me. She repeated the script Isabel had rehearsed with her, painting herself as the victim of a controlling, deceitful mother. It was painful to hear her lie, but I held my ground. There was no agreement. The judge set a new date, and the legal battle would continue. In parallel, I began to use my own resources. As the building owner, I had access to information others didn't. I asked Manny for a report from the security cameras from the last few months. I spent hours watching the footage, looking for patterns, for anything out of the ordinary, and I found it. I saw Richard receiving visits from strange people in the parking garage, hastily exchanging manila envelopes. I saw him leaving at odd hours, in the middle of the night, only to return at dawn. He carried a backpack that always seemed full on the way out and empty on the way back. What was he carrying? What was he selling? With each passing day, the house of cards that was Richard's life seemed more fragile. Walter, the investigator, called with updates. He discovered that Richard was using a false name. His real name was different, and he had a criminal record for fraud in another state. Amelia's story was not an isolated case. Walter found 2 more women, both elderly, who had fallen for the same scam. The pattern was always the same: seduction, isolation from family, transfer of assets, and finally disappearing with everything of value, leaving a trail of debt and broken hearts. The danger was much more real and imminent than I had imagined. He wasn't just going to leave. From what Walter had gathered, he was in the final phase of the scam with Lucy, getting her as deep into debt as possible, using the apartment as collateral before making his final move and disappearing. And my daughter, blinded by passion and anger, was signing every paper he put in front of her. Walter's confirmation that Richard was a career criminal fell on me like a slab of concrete. The fear for Lucy became a physical presence, a constant ache in my chest. Every time I saw the light on in her apartment, I imagined him in there, smiling, plotting, manipulating her into signing her own ruin. I had the proof, the stories from other victims, his criminal record. But how could I use it? Lucy was entrenched behind a wall of mistrust, with Isabel standing guard. Any direct attack from me would be seen as a desperate maneuver in the lawsuit. I needed an ally, someone close to Lucy, but whose vision wasn't completely clouded. And there was only one person who fit that description: my brother-in-law, Charles, Isabel's father. Charles was the opposite of his daughter, a quiet man, a retired accountant who had always maintained a cordial relationship with me. Despite the rivalry between his late wife and me, he loved Lucy like a daughter, and while he was certainly influenced by Isabel's narrative, his common sense and affection for his niece could be the sliver of light I was looking for. I arranged to meet him at a discreet coffee shop far from our neighborhood. He arrived wary, his loyalty to his daughter written all over his cautious expression. "Evelyn, I don't know if this is a good idea. Isabel asked me not to have any contact with you until the case is over," he said, not even sitting down. I asked him to listen to me for just 5 minutes. In a calm but urgent voice, I didn't talk about the apartment, the debt, or our fight. I spoke only about Richard. I told him about the widow Amelia, about the other victims, about the fake name and the criminal record. I placed a copy of Walter's report on the table. Charles listened in silence, his brow furrowed. At first, I saw skepticism in his eyes, the suspicion that this was all a fabrication to win his sympathy. But as he read the report, his expression changed. The color drained from his face. He knew Richard. He had dined with him a few times at Lucy's. I could see the pieces clicking into place in his mind. Richard's evasiveness about his past, his excessive interest in finances, the way he seemed to isolate Lucy from everyone. "My God, Evelyn, if this is true," he whispered, his hand trembling as he set the papers down. "It is true, Charles. And Lucy is next on his list. He's having her sign for loans, using the apartment as collateral. When there's no more credit available, he'll disappear and leave her with a debt she can never repay." The desperation in my voice finally convinced him. A concerned uncle's worry overcame a loyal father's. "What can we do? Isabel won't believe any of this coming from you. And Lucy is blind. That's why I need your help," I said, leaning across the table. "You need to talk to Isabel, not as my messenger, but as her father. Ask her, as a favor, to use her resources as a lawyer to verify Richard's identity. Tell her you're worried, that you heard a rumor and just want to be sure Lucy is safe. Don't mention my name." Charles pondered for a long moment, his gaze lost in the street traffic. It was a difficult request. I was asking him to go against his own daughter, to plant the seed of doubt in a case she was determined to win, but his love for Lucy spoke louder. "I'll do it," he finally said, his voice firm. "And I'll talk to her today, for Lucy." I left that coffee shop with a small spark of hope. The seed was planted. Now, it remained to be seen if it would sprout in such barren soil. The following days were filled with unbearable tension. I heard nothing from Charles, and the facade of normalcy in apartment 301 continued. Richard was still there, and every day that passed was another opportunity for him to sink Lucy even deeper. The silent battle for my daughter's soul was being fought in law firm corridors and tense family conversations, and I, the most invested party, could only wait and pray. The waiting was torture. Every phone call made me jump. Every knock on the door set my heart racing. I alternated between hoping Charles could convince Isabel and despairing that it was too late. From my window, I had become a helpless spectator to the drama of Lucy's life. I saw the lights in her apartment go off late at night and come on very early. She seemed to be losing weight, her shoulders always slumped under a weight I knew well but couldn't help her carry. Richard, on the other hand, seemed more relaxed, almost jubilant. He went out more often, always talking on his phone with a satisfied smile. He was probably finalizing the details of his scam, preparing his escape route. Time was running out. I could feel it in my bones. The silence was broken in an unexpected way. On a Thursday afternoon, my intercom buzzed. It was Isabel. Her voice, usually so controlled and cold, was different. There was a tone of urgency, almost panic. "Aunt Evelyn, can I come up? I need to talk to you. It's important." My heart leaped. I said yes, my mind spinning with 1,000 possibilities. What had she discovered? Had Charles succeeded? Minutes later, she was at my door. Her appearance shocked me. The impeccable lawyer, always in well-tailored suits and perfect makeup, looked disheveled. Her hair was slightly messy, her face pale, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She walked into my living room without waiting for an invitation, holding a tablet with trembling hands. "My father asked me to investigate Richard," she began without preamble, her voice tense. "He said he was worried, that he'd heard some rumors. I thought it was nonsense, an attempt by you to manipulate me through him. But I did what he asked, to put his mind at ease." She paused, taking a deep breath, as if summoning the courage to continue. "I used the firm's contacts to run a background check on him. The name he uses, it's fake. Everything is fake. The man living with Lucy is named Marcus Oliveira, and he has 3 outstanding warrants for his arrest for fraud and racketeering. He specializes in scams against women. He seduces them, gains their trust, gets them deep into debt, and then disappears with everything." Every word she said confirmed what Walter had already told me, but hearing it from Isabel, my adversary, carried a different weight. It was the capitulation of disbelief, the surrender to a terrible truth. Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of anger and frustration. I couldn't believe it. I spent all night cross-referencing information. You're talking to colleagues in other states. I found the case file for that Amelia woman my father mentioned, and 2 others. The pattern is identical. Lucy isn't the first, and he's in the final stage of the scam with her. She showed me the tablet screen. There were photos of Marcus or Richard with other women. There were copies of lawsuits, depositions from victims who had lost everything. And, most frighteningly, there was a record of a new, very large loan that Lucy had signed 2 days ago, using the apartment as final collateral. The money, according to the contract, was due to be released into her account the next day. He's going to take that money and vanish, Auntie. And he's going to leave Lucy with a debt she can never repay. And we were suing the only person who was trying to protect her. The regret in her voice was palpable. In that moment, she wasn't a cold lawyer, but a terrified cousin, frightened for her family's fate. This was our common ground. The moment our differences were swept away by the urgency of the situation. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her pleading eyes fixed on mine. The question was no longer about a lawsuit or an apartment. It was about saving Lucy. "First," I said, a wave of clarity washing over me, "you are going to withdraw this lawsuit against me immediately. Second, we are going to the bank right now to try and block the release of that loan. And third, we need to get Lucy out of that apartment before he comes home tonight. We don't know what he's capable of if he realizes he's been found out." The war had shifted fronts. We were no longer adversaries. We were allies on a desperate rescue mission. We moved with the speed that desperation demands. While Isabel was on the phone with her office, furiously dictating instructions for the immediate withdrawal of the lawsuit against me, I was already on the phone with my bank manager, a man with whom I'd had a trusted relationship for decades. I explained the situation in clear, urgent terms, omitting the sordid family details and focusing on the fraud. "Mr. Armstrong, the loan in my daughter Lucy's name was made under duress as part of a confidence scam. I need you to block the release of those funds at all costs. It's an emergency." On the other end of the line, I heard the sound of typing. There was a tense pause. "Mrs. Evelyn, the payment order has already been issued. The money is scheduled to be deposited into her account first thing tomorrow. Trying to reverse it now is complicated. We would need a court order." My heart sank. The bureaucracy was an insurmountable wall. "We don't have time for a court order," I insisted, my voice rising an octave. This man is going to drain the account and disappear." Isabel, who had been listening, took the phone from my hand. Her lawyer persona took over. "This is Isabel Stewart, attorney at law. I am emailing you at this very moment the police report I just filed online for fraud and larceny, along with the warrant numbers for the individual in question. If the bank releases this money, aware of an active criminal investigation, you will be considered an accomplice and co-liable for the damages. Is that a risk you want to take, Mr. Armstrong?" The veiled threat, backed by legal terminology, worked. There was another, longer pause. "Understood, Counselor. I will escalate this to the fraud department immediately. I can't promise anything, but I will do my best to put a security hold on this transaction." It was a small victory, but not a guarantee. The threat of the money still loomed over us. We hung up and looked at each other. The next step was the most delicate and dangerous, getting Lucy out of there, how to approach her, how to make her believe us after weeks of treating her like an enemy. "She won't answer a call from me," I said, "and probably not from you either. She'll think it's about the lawsuit." Isabel agreed. "We have to go there, together. She won't be able to run from the conversation." We went down in silence. Each floor the elevator passed heightened the tension. When we stood before the door to 301, the door to my old home, my heart was hammering against my ribs. Isabel took a deep breath and knocked. We heard footsteps inside. The door opened a crack. Lucy saw us, and her expression hardened. "What do you two want here?" she said, her voice full of hostility. She tried to close the door, but I put my foot in the way, blocking it. "Lucy, please, just listen to us," Isabel pleaded, her voice trembling. "It's not about the apartment, it's about Richard." His name made her hesitate. "What about him?" she asked, suspicious. "He's not who you think he is, sweetie," I said, the pain in my voice the purest truth. "He's a criminal. We have proof. He's using you." Lucy laughed, a bitter, joyless sound. "Oh, sure. What a brilliant plan. The two of you team up to invent stories about Richard to make me drop the lawsuit. Do you think I'm an idiot?" Her refusal to believe was like a brick wall. We showed her the tablet, the photos, the case files. She glanced at them, shaking her head. "Fakes, all of it. You two are just... She couldn't find the words. Richard's brainwashing ran deeper than we'd imagined. She was so isolated, so convinced the world was against her. She couldn't distinguish truth from lies. Just then, her phone, sitting on a console table in the entryway, rang. The screen read, "My love, Richard." She answered, putting it on speaker in a gesture of defiance, as if to prove us wrong. "Hi, honey. Where are you?" she asked. His voice came through, metallic and distant. "Hey, babe. Something came up. I'm going to be a little late. Listen, did our money come through? The loan?" The question was so direct, so focused on the money, that even Lucy seemed to falter for a second. "Not yet. The bank said first thing in the morning," she replied. There was a pause, and then Richard's voice changed, losing its softness. "That's weird. It was supposed to be there today. Call your manager again. Be firm. Tell them you need the money today. We have to leave for our trip tomorrow morning. Remember? Our new start." And then he said the sentence that broke the spell. The sentence that demolished the castle of lies. "Don't forget to grab your passport and your mother's jewelry that you put away. We're going to need all of it." Richard's final words hung in the air, charged with a weight that sucked all the oxygen from the room. "Your mother's jewelry that you put away." It was a piece of information that only Lucy and I knew. After my husband's death, I had stored the few family jewels I owned, and in a moment of vulnerability, I told Lucy where they were, in a false bottom of a drawer, a secret between mother and daughter, a secret that she, in her blind loyalty, had shared with him. All the color drained from Lucy's face. Her eyes, previously full of defiance, were now wide with shock and a slow, painful dawning of comprehension. She looked from the phone to me, and for the first time in weeks, she truly saw me. She saw the genuine concern in my eyes, the bitter truth I had been trying to show her. Her denial, which had been her armor, shattered into 1,000 pieces. "Lucy, hang up the phone," I said, my voice soft but firm. She obeyed, her fingers trembling as she touched the screen. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by her ragged breathing. She took a step back, leaning against the wall to keep from falling. Reality hit her with the force of a freight train. The love of her life. The man for whom she had turned her back on her own mother didn't love her. He was using her. Every kind word, every promise of a future was all part of a cruel script to rob her. And the mention of my jewelry was the irrefutable proof, the key that unlocked the door to her emotional prison. Isabel, sensing the fragility of the moment, acted with a sensitivity I didn't know she possessed. She moved toward Lucy and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Lucy, we're going to fix this, but you have to get out of here now." Lucy didn't answer. She just started to cry. A silent, desperate weeping, tears streaming down a face that seemed to have aged 10 years in 10 seconds. It was the cry of betrayal, of humiliation, of a broken heart. I went to her and, without thinking, I embraced her. At first, her body was rigid, a statue of pain. But slowly, she relaxed into my arms, clinging to me like a frightened child, sobbing against my shoulder. All the resentment, all the anger I had felt for her these past weeks dissolved in that hug. Here, in my arms, was just my little girl, hurt and lost. I was so stupid, Mom, she whispered between sobs. So stupid. No, I said, stroking her hair. You were deceived. He's a professional at this. It's not your fault. We had to be quick. Richard or Marcus would realize something was wrong when Lucy didn't return his calls. Isabel got straight to the point. We can't take anything, just her documents and her cell phone. He can't know we've left. While Lucy, still in a state of shock, grabbed her purse, my eyes scanned the apartment. My old home, now a stage for lies. On the coffee table, I saw the transfer papers I had signed, the proof of her betrayal, but also the instrument of her ruin. Without a second thought, I took the papers and put them in my purse. We left the apartment, pulling the door silently closed behind us, like fugitives. In the elevator, Lucy huddled in a corner, her gaze empty. The journey back to my apartment, 12 floors up, felt like an eternity. When we entered my home, the safety of the penthouse, she looked around at the bright, spacious rooms, and the scale of what she had lost, and what she had almost lost, seemed to hit her all over again. "Is he going to come looking for me?" she asked, her voice a thread. Probably," Isabel answered, already on her phone to call the police, give them our address, and request a patrol car to be on standby. "But he's not getting in here. This building is a fortress now." Night fell, and with it, a heavy silence. The three of us, the women of this family, sat in the living room, united by a crisis that had nearly destroyed us. It was then that Lucy turned to me, her eyes red and swollen, but holding a new clarity. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know what got into me. He convinced me you were the villain, that you were hiding things from me, that I deserved more. I was greedy and cruel. I don't deserve your forgiveness." This was the crux of it all. It wasn't about the apartment, the debt, or the con man. It was about us, about the wound we had opened in our relationship, and the healing, I knew, would begin in this very moment. I looked at my daughter, broken and humble before me, and I saw not the arrogant woman who had hurt me, but the vulnerable child I had raised. The pain of betrayal, which for 2 weeks had been my constant companion, finally gave way to a much older, more powerful feeling, a mother's unconditional love. The revenge I had planned now seemed like a bitter medicine that had almost killed the patient. Yes, she had learned a lesson, but the emotional cost for both of us had been immense. This moment of vulnerability was our only chance to rebuild the bridge that had been burned between us. "Get up, Lucy," I said softly, holding out my hand to her. "Forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's a decision, and I decide to forgive you." She took my hand, her skin cold against mine, and I pulled her up into another hug. This time, a hug of new beginnings, of relief, of coming home. That night, while Lucy took a hot shower and Isabel handled legal matters on the phone, I made a vegetable soup, the same kind I used to make for her when she was sick as a child. The act of cooking, of caring, was my way of saying what words could not express. We sat at the table, the three of us. The mood was one of exhaustion, but also of a newfound peace. Isabel informed us that the police were now stationed at the front desk, awaiting Richard's arrival. The block on the loan had been confirmed. The net was closing. We spoke little during dinner, but in the silence, a new alliance was forming. Isabel, who was once my adversary, now looked at me with a newfound respect, and Lucy, for the first time in a long time, looked at me with the admiration I thought I had lost forever. The resolution of the conflicts that had divided us began at that table. I took the transfer papers for apartment 301, which were still in my purse. I placed them on the table, between the soup bowls. This, I said, looking at Lucy, was a mistake from both of us. Mine, for not being honest with you about my life and my assets. Yours, for letting greed and mistrust guide your actions. I tore the papers in half, then into quarters, then into eighths, until they were just useless pieces of confetti. The apartment is yours, if you still want it, but so is the debt. However, we'll figure it out, together. Lucy's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. No, Mom, I don't want it. That place, I can't. Let's sell it. Pay off the debt. Whatever is left over, if anything, it doesn't matter. I just want my life back. I want my mom back. The next morning, the police informed us that Marcus, alias Richard, had been arrested while trying to enter the building in the middle of the night. When he noticed the patrol car, he tried to run but was caught. He never got the chance to get the money or to disappear. His career of crime had come to an end. With Isabel's help, we began the long process of undoing the damage. We put apartment 301 up for sale. We filed formal charges against Marcus, and Lucy had to give painful depositions, reliving every lie, every manipulation, but she was no longer alone. I was by her side every step of the way, as were Isabel and Charles. The family he had tried so hard to destroy had come together to heal the wounds he caused. We discovered the debt he had tricked her into was even larger than we'd imagined. But with my resources and the sale of the property, we managed to pay it all off. Financially, Lucy emerged from the nightmare at square one, debt-free, but with no assets. However, she had gained something far more valuable, a second chance and clarity on what truly matters in life. Justice ran its course, and Marcus's other victims were also found and encouraged to press charges. My small personal battle ended up dismantling a criminal enterprise, bringing peace to other families. In the end, the suffering brought about a greater good, and our recovery was just beginning. The 2 weeks following Marcus's arrest were like waking from a long, delirious fever. Reality settled in slowly, layer by layer, bringing with it the clarity and consequences of everything that had happened. Apartment 301 sold quickly, thankfully for a good price that covered the mortgage and the fraudulent loans Lucy had signed. There was no profit left, but the relief of freeing ourselves from that financial and emotional knot was the greatest payment we could have received. Lucy moved into one of the smaller apartments in the building, a 2-bedroom on the 6th floor that was vacant. It was a humble but honest new beginning. Watching her unpack her boxes, organizing her new life with the few things she had left, was both painful and inspiring. The proud, materialistic woman had given way to someone quieter, more reflective. Our relationship, once fractured, began to heal in small daily gestures. She started having breakfast with me every morning in my penthouse. We didn't talk much about what happened. The trauma was still too raw. Instead, we talked about the future, about simple plans. She decided to go back to school for landscape design, an old passion she had abandoned. "I want to work with things that grow, Mom. I want to see beauty come from the earth," she told me one day, as we watered the plants on my balcony. In that moment, I knew she was going to be okay. The wound Marcus left was deep, but it wasn't fatal. She was rediscovering her strength, her essence, far from the shadow of greed that had almost consumed her. I changed, too. The Evelyn who lived hidden behind a facade of simplicity, afraid her wealth would attract the worst in people, gave way to a woman who understood that true value isn't in what you have, but in what you do with it. I decided to openly take over the management of the building, dropping the shell companies and intermediaries. The other residents were surprised, but they received me with respect and admiration. The story of what happened with Lucy, though its most intimate details were kept private, served as a cautionary tale in the community. People began to look more carefully at relationships, to value transparency and honesty more. My act of self-preservation, which became a plan for revenge and finally a rescue mission, culminated in a personal transformation. I learned that hiding my success didn't protect me, it only isolated me. True security lay in building trustworthy relationships and in using my resources to help and protect those I love, but with wisdom and boundaries. The bond with my late brother-in-law's family also strengthened. Charles became a frequent visitor, and even Isabel, the pragmatic lawyer, started showing up for Sunday lunches. The crisis had forced us to tear down the walls of old rivalries and resentments. We discovered that beneath the layers of past hurts, we were just family. One afternoon, over coffee, Isabel looked at me with sincerity. "Aunt Evelyn, I owe you an apology. I was blind, arrogant. I judged you without knowing the truth." I smiled at her. "We all make mistakes, Isabel. The important thing is that we learn from them. And we learned to fight together when it mattered. The emotional resolution of our journey wasn't a single event, but an ongoing process of forgiveness, acceptance, and rebuilding. The wound that nearly destroyed us became the scar that united us in a way I never thought possible. Today, 2 weeks after that fateful night, when I look out my window, I don't just see a city, I see a building full of stories, a reunited family, and a daughter who, in losing everything, finally found herself. And I, at 68, discovered that the greatest wealth isn't owning a building, but having a home where your daughter can always return.